Hi guys, welcome back. We are starting a new book today. It's one book out of a series of many called Who's Who. And this one is Joan of Arc. I've heard her name so many times, but I never knew who Joan of Arc was until I read this to my boys a couple months ago. And I just know that you're going to love it too. So we're going to read 2 chapters today, and we'll be back tomorrow to read 2 more. There's only about 10 chapters in this book, so it's pretty small. So, who was Joan of Arc? Chapter 1. English soldiers surrounded the great walls of Orleans, France. The people had been trapped inside the town without food for 7 months. You guys, this is a true story. 7 months. The English hoped that if they closed off the city long enough, the French citizens would open up their gates and surrender. True story. This is wild. France and England had been at war for as long as the people of Orleans could remember. The Duke of Orleans, the town's leader, had already been captured by the English. His half-brother, John de Denoy, did his best to defend the town, but he could not drive the English away. The people of Orleans were beginning to lose hope. They were hungry. They thought of another siege 10 years before in another French town. It had lasted a full year. The people of that city had been forced to eat cats, horses, and rats to survive. Eventually, the city surrendered. The people of Orleans did not want to surrender, but what else could they do? We need a miracle, they said. And maybe a miracle was coming. People who managed to sneak inside the gate of Orleans brought news of a very special peasant girl. She saw visions. She spoke to angels, and her name was Joan of Arc. April 29th of 1429, the citizens of Orleans heard amazing news. Joan had arrived. She had slipped through an unguarded gate in the wall and entered the town. And she was not alone. She brought men who wanted to help and wagon loads of food and farm animals. Hundreds of people ran to see her. What they saw was a 17-year-old girl who wore her hair cut short and dressed like a boy. She wore a suit of armor specially made to fit her small size. She carried a sword and a banner with angels on it. The banner read, Jesus Maria, for Jesus and Mary. She was on a mission to save the town of Orleans. When the people of Orleans looked at her, they saw an unlikely hero who they believed had been sent by God. With her sword at her side and her banner raised high, Joan was a living symbol of hope for the people of Orleans and for all of France. Here's a picture of her. There's her banner. There she is. 100-year war. Joan of Arc was born in the village of Domremy, France. It's believed her birthday is January 6, 1412, but there's no official record. Her family called her Jehan, but she eventually came to be known by the English form of her name, which was Joan. Joan's father was Jacques d'Arc. Her mother was named Isabel. Joan had 3 older brothers, Jacquemin, Jean, and Pierre, and a sister, Catherine. As a girl in Domremy, Joan was taught to sew and spin wool into yarn. Joan, her brothers, and her sister carried water from the village well to the house, and they helped care for the family's cattle and sheep. Like many of the other children in the village, she never learned to read or write. She dressed like an ordinary country girl of the time in a simple, dark red dress. In the woods outside her village stood an old beech tree that was said to have once been the meeting spot for a fairy and the man that she loved. Villagers called it the fairy tree. In springtime, boys and girls hung flowers there and danced. They said the stream nearby was magic and could cure illness. Whatever magic beliefs there were in Domremy, the official religion was Roman Catholic. The people were Christians. Joan was a good Catholic. She prayed every day and went to church every Sunday. Life in Domremy should have been peaceful, but the country was torn apart by war. In 1420, when Joan was 8, the French king Charles VI signed an agreement with England's King Henry V. It said that Henry's son, who was Charles's grandson, would rule both France and England. And many French people felt betrayed by this treaty. They did not want an English king, even one who was part French, to rule them. They believed their true king was Charles VI's own son, Charles, whom they called the Dauphin. But not all French people liked the Dauphin. Some wanted to be ruled by the English king. When Charles VI died in 1422, everyone fought over who the true king was. Growing up, Joan saw many boys from Domremy fight with boys from the neighboring towns over who should win the war and who should rule France. One day in 1425, 13-year-old Joan was working in her family's garden. She heard someone speak her name. When she turned to see who it was, she only saw a bright light. Joan was terrified. She ran away. Not long after, the voice returned. By the third time she heard the voice, Joan was certain who it was. It was an angel. It was Michael, the archangel, who led God's armies in heaven. Saint Michael was considered to be the guardian angel of Domremy. In Joan's time, most people believed in angels. Visions from God did not seem so extraordinary. Joan didn't think she was imagining things. The archangel Michael continued to visit her. He told her to be a good girl, to go to church, and to obey her parents. And Joan did her best. Soon, the spirit of Saint Michael was joined by two others, Saint Margaret of Antioch and Saint Catherine of Alexandria. When Joan was 16, the saints told her something new. She was destined to help the Dauphin become king. Joan was stunned. There she is. How could she, a young girl, expect to help the Prince of France? How could she win back his kingdom from an invading army? It seemed impossible. But Joan had strong faith, and she believed in her visions, and she believed that with God's help, anything was possible. The first problem was to figure out a way to meet the prince. She knew her parents would not let her leave home by herself, but as she said later, since God had commanded me to go, I must do it. And since God had commanded it, had I had 100 fathers and 100 mothers, I would have gone. She had never even been very far outside her own village. Joan was not sure how she was going to do it, but she was determined to save France. Chapter 2. In the summer of 1428, Domremy was raided by the French soldiers who sided with England. Joan's family left to stay at an inn in a nearby town. Joan thought that the French people who sided with England were betraying their country. Joan's visions told her that with her help, Charles, the Dauphin, could drive the English out of France. Joan did not understand what that help would be, but she trusted that her visions were true. At that time, the Dauphin was in the town of Chinon, over 350 miles away. Joan had a cousin who lived not far from the commander of a French fortress, and Joan told her parents that she wanted to visit her cousin, who was going to have a baby. What Joan really wanted was to speak to the commander, Robert de Baudricourt. When Joan arrived in December, her cousin's husband took her to meet Baudricourt. Joan explained that she needed to get to Charles. Like many Frenchmen, Baudricourt had heard of a prophecy, a prediction about the future, that a maid, an unmarried girl, would win France back from the English. Perhaps the maid was Joan, but Baudricourt was not so easily convinced. When Joan told him that God said that she would make Charles king of France, Baudricourt did not believe her. Looks like he was mad. He said, "Get out." He told Joan's escort to take her back to her father and have him punish her for telling stories. But Joan did not go home. She remained in the town, determined to convince Baudricourt of the truth of her visions. She said, "I must be with the king, though I wear my legs to my knees on the road." Joan meant that she did not care how far she would have to walk to meet him. Like most poor people, she'd never learned to ride a horse. And they didn't have cars. The people of the town all heard about the girl in the red dress who claimed she was going to save France. One of these people was a young knight called Jean de Metz. He soon became her most loyal supporter. Commander Baudricourt was surprised when Joan did not give up. Eventually, he was won over by her determination. He wrote to the Dauphin about her. Amazingly, Charles agreed to a meeting. Would you be so happy? Wow. So here it's just a little story about what knights are. So let's read about what knights are. A knight is a special soldier honored by a king or queen for their loyalty and bravery. Usually a knight worked in service of a lord, a man who owned land and a castle. Knights became known for following a code of chivalry. This meant they were expected to be brave and honorable and to protect those who could not protect themselves. Knights often traveled with a personal servant called a squire. Squires, archers, and foot soldiers might be killed if they were captured. Knights, on the other hand, were usually treated well and returned to their lord. Knights were known for being excellent horsemen and skilled fighters. Wow. News of the girl who talked to angels and was going to save France quickly spread. Joan was so confident about God's orders that people began to believe in her. They were thrilled when Charles said he would meet with her. That made Joan's mission seem even more real. If this poor girl had managed to get the Dauphin's attention, what else could she do? Before she left for Chinon, Joan told Baudricourt that she had received a new message from the saints. She told him the French army had been defeated that very day in a faraway city. Baudricourt was puzzled. The battle had taken place many miles away. No one could have heard of this outcome yet. In 1429, Joan left to meet with the Dauphin. She traveled with Jean de Metz, his squire, an archer, and 3 servants. Crowds came to see them off at the city gate. In preparation for the 350-mile trip, Joan cut her long hair and changed her red dress for boys' traveling clothes. The saints had requested that she dress this way, even though it was considered very shocking for a girl to wear boys' clothes. Here she is cutting her hair. Days later, news of a French defeat reached Commander Baudricourt. Everything had happened just as Joan said it did. The voices Joan had been hearing seemed to know details that even important officials did not. This seemed to prove to Baudricourt that she really was being guided by God. But could Joan really predict the future? Okay, guys, there's our 2 chapters for the day. We'll see you tomorrow for the next 2. Have a good night. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you get updates when I post new chapters. Bye.